Hey guys, 20th of December here in central Illinois. Chilly one today, a lot of wind out there. I added a little bit of something to the layout. Thought it would be nice to have a bridge. We'll see how long that lasts. Really, that's kind of in the way for doing stuff, but I was going to put it out on Facebook Marketplace and sell it, and I still might, but I thought I'd give it a chance and see how it worked out, see whether or not that 392 would fit through it, and of course it did. All right, but what I'm here to talk about is I've had a couple guys ask me about this 5-rail track, and I don't have all the stuff that I at one time had, but I will try to explain it to you as to what you need to do. Now, first of all, no, nobody makes for sale 5-rail track that's tubular. However, Gargraves makes it. But you have to then bend it yourself to make the curves. This is not a hard process. What I did was initially, I bought track from USA Track. They make standard gauge track, curves, the whole ball of wax. And they also sell individual standard gauge ties and rails, and you can manufacture your own. They used to also sell O-gauge ties, just like this. You got to have O-gauge ties. So initially, what I did was I bought, I don't know, 300 or 400 O-gauge ties, and they also sell the insulating material for the tie for the third rail. You'll have to have that if you were using extra ties. And all I did was I attached those ties to the center rail on this standard gauge track. Now, you can do the same thing in these long sessions like this. I'm sorry, I'm one-handed, and this is not probably going to be as good as I'd like it to be. But if you were to take off the third rail and you would slide this up underneath here, you can then crimp it, and you make sure you're flush down here. And what I did was I just used a straight edge. I butted it up against that, make sure it was all even, and you'll go all the way down. And in this case, this O-gauge long section is longer. You would cut it off right here. Then you have a straight section of track that is 5-rail. Now here is some 5-rail, and it's the 72-inch circle track. Now let me show you. You'll notice that the outside ties fit on top of the O-gauge rails. That's a nice thing to have. It just gives it more support. Now there is no O-gauge curves. Well, there would be. I take that back. You can use O-gauge on the standard gauge. The problem of it is it will be shorter. So what you would have to do is you'd have to take a standard gauge curve, and you'd have to take this all apart, get your O-gauge ties under here like that, then you would add the rail to it. Now, when you're closing it together, these will get longer. So you'll have to, everything on this except one end. I don't know if I started from this end and build it, or I probably started from the pin end and build it. And then this has to be cut off. You either cut it off with a chop saw or a Dremel tool. And that's all you have to do to make 5-rail track. Now, like I say, I used to buy all this stuff from USA Track. And what you need are the ties. So what you're going to have to do is you're either going to have to buy, and I understand some guys go to Menards because they sell O-gauge, but you have to have O-gauge rail and track. That's taller than O27. O27 is too short. In fact, the rails on O-gauge are exactly the same rails that they use on standard gauge. It's exactly the same height. So there's no problem with that. The other thing that I did, we got to go over here to my very neat and clean work center. It's all OSHA approved, as you can see. All right, what I have here is called a clamping tool, all right? All that does is that rides down on top of the rail, over the rail, and it presses down the clips, keeps them nice and tight. Now, I'm going to lift this up and it's going to fall. And what I did was, this Rinctum was sold by Hobby Horse, which is no longer in business. And I don't know if anybody sells a Rinctum like this or not. It came with an anvil, but it came with a little round anvil, and I made a bigger anvil. And then I can spin this however I want it. And of course you can spin this too by loosening that. But this is quick. This does it real quick. You can set your rail up and you can crimp it and you can get it done in nothing flat. A lot easier than using a pair of pliers or a screwdriver and hitting it with a hammer. The other thing that you would have to remember, if you're using something like this, these tabs, they have to be a bit of an angle, because if they're straight up and down and this thing comes on top of it, it will accordion flat. So you won't have any tab left. So that's what we've done for building the 5-rail track. Like I say, anybody can do it, but you're going to have to buy one gauge. You're going to have to buy O-gauge track so that you can get the O-gauge ties, and you're going to have to sacrifice it to make your 5-rail track. And you're going to have to sacrifice some standard gauge curves to hook to the O-gauge cross ties. That's the only way you can do it. Or, like I say, or you can go ahead and you can buy 72-inch circle curves from USA Track. And I forget how we did it now, but when I originally, I'm trying to find some that's not been changed. Here we go. Let's just go up here. This is 57. This is a 57. But anyhow, you've got 3 rails on a curve. One of them is longer, medium, and short. And there was a way, I can't remember how we did it. We may have taken a top one and the pickup and added that. It wasn't as much waste. It wasn't as long, or it wasn't as short, because everything's going to have to be trimmed. Better to be too long than to be too short. So I don't know that this is going to answer any questions for you about the 5-rail track. Like I say, if USA Track still sold the ties, all you'd have to do is buy the ties and buy the rails and put it all together yourself. It's no big deal. But like I say, you can do this. You can easily do the straight pieces just by buying an O-gauge long section here, which is a little bit too long, as you can see. Clip that in there. Push those tabs down nice and tight. Cut it off, and you're ready to rock and roll. And like I say, here again, if you're wanting to do standard gauge curves, then you're going to have to find some way to get O-gauge ties, and then you're going to have to take the rails off of your surplus standard gauge curves, or buy rail from USA Track. Like I say, you can do that, whatever would be the most efficient, because this ain't going to be cheap. It may look cheap. It ain't cheap. I think originally, and I'm not sure, but I think originally when I bought these O-gauge ties from USA Track, I think I gave 25 or 35 cents a piece for them. And believe me, you can see it. I got a lot of ties in there. And the more you get, the more rigid your track is. Here's some up here that really, I did it this way because I was running out of ties. As you can see, there aren't many ties in there. It still works fine, but it would work a whole lot better if I had multiple ties. I need ties between ties. So as you can see, I had plenty of ties here, lots of them. So I hope that answers some of your questions. The other thing I'm going to go into just for a second, if I can figure out where I put it. Oh, here it is. This is, let me bring it back into the light here. This is my conversion of standard gauge into 1 gauge. Now this is authentic 1 gauge track. And you can see how well it lines up. And what I've done is, if you can see that, the tabs on the outside are turned up and the rail is impaled on top of the inside tab, straight down. You can, I don't think I did it on this one. Yes, I did. I can see a little solder. You can see that there. You can solder them, because this is a short piece, to make them permanent. I will tell you this. This is the blued steel. You've got to take all the bluing off to solder, because solder won't stick to it. The other thing is, the rail is the same height, but the manufactured, the one that I made in standard gauge, is slightly, and I do mean slightly, is slightly narrower than the regular 1 gauge. It's a little bit under gauge, but I would rather have it a little sloppy as too tight. And like I say, it's so minute that it goes ahead and you slip it right in. You don't have to fight it. It works really well. So if you're thinking about doing 1 gauge, you can do this. You can make your curves. You can make your straightaways. And it's nice to know that this stuff will then mate with a crossover or a switch. It's easy to do. All right. That's pretty much it for the 5-rail lesson, if that's what you want to call it. But like I said, guys, take your time. It's not difficult. Have a Dremel tool. I can tell you, I tried to cut it with a hacksaw. That's too much work for an old man. But let me know what you think. I think if you're really wanting to double gauge stuff, this is the way to go. It's a lot of fun, and it's just nice to be able to run standard gauge and O gauge in the same footprint. And if I were smart, I would take the 57-inch circle that I've got here, and I would double gauge this too. That way I'd have a little bit more room to run my O gauge, because all I'm doing is running it on this and up there on the Gargraves, which is great. But that rail is short, so some of your bigger flanges right on the ties. So, all right, I'll let you go. You guys have a good one, and we'll talk with you later. Toodaloo.